Areena.
Hello and welcome to All Points North. I'm Matthew Schilke. Today, I'm standing in Hietaniemi Cemetery in Helsinki. In the summer, this area feels almost festive. The nearby beach is crowded with people sunbathing, playing volleyball, and swimming in the bay. But in early December, this walled-in stretch of land carries a very different atmosphere. The trees are bare, devoid of leaves. Gravestones and memorials have been freshly cleaned, and above it all hangs a sky that at this time of year is almost perpetually gray. Hietaniemi is the final resting place for many of Finland's most prominent figures. It is also the burial ground for thousands of soldiers who fought in the Winter, Continuation, and Lapland Wars. They are the three conflicts Finland fought during the Second World War, and those experiences have gone a long way towards shaping modern Finland. For listeners in the U.S., the atmosphere here may draw similarities to Arlington National Cemetery, a place of collective memory where service members, astronauts, and presidents are buried overlooking Washington, D.C. Back here at Hietaniemi, the cemetery will once again serve as a focal point for national remembrance on Saturday, Finland's Independence Day. Former and current presidents will give speeches, wreaths will be laid, the ceremony will be broadcast live across the country. For decades, Finland's war veterans have held a central, revered role in these Independence Day observances. And this often hits home for many Finns. Almost every Finnish family was impacted by the three wars in some way. At the end of the Winter War, nearly 400,000 people had fled areas of Finnish Karelia that were ceded to the Soviet Union, around 12% of the country's entire population at the time. While Finland did not win, the true victory was in preserving sovereignty. One of the reasons why war veterans are still heralded today as national heroes, and especially on a day honoring Finland's independence. The image that comes to mind for many Finns, and for me, of Independence Day, is veterans being welcomed as the first honored guests, shaking hands with the president at the Presidential Independence Day reception. That tradition ended last year. Instead, President Alexander Stubb now hosts a separate, dedicated event for veterans ahead of the holiday. Earlier this week, I spoke with Sakari Martimo, who works with a veterans support organization, on why this changed and what the new event honoring Finnish veterans looks like.
I participated yesterday to this specific event that our president arranged for our veterans. There were some 20 veterans there, and then some other people or guests. The same amount that used to participate in this Linnanjuhla or Independence Day celebration. You have to remember that they are 100 years old people who have to travel even from northern part of Finland, hundreds of kilometers. The Independence Day celebration takes easy 5 to 6 hours, and the president doesn't have time to spend with veterans because he has or she has so many other guests to take care of. But yesterday, our president and Mr. Stubb and his spouse or wife, they had the full attention for the veterans for the whole 2 hours that the event took. And it was much more suitable way for the veterans also. Quiet, calm, good food, music, speeches. So I think that this is much better way to honor them.
Sakari added that by 2035, it is likely that the last of Finland's war veterans will be gone. Much has been said about history repeating itself. Many see parallels between Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022 and the Winter War of 1939 to 1940, when the Soviet Union invaded Finland. Sakari has spent quite a bit of time with this generation of Finns, and I asked him what they make of the current situation in Ukraine, as well as Finland joining NATO.
Well, they are not afraid, but worried, because it resembles so much the situation 85 years back. Mm-hmm. They know and they can put these things in perspective much better than we do. Almost every veteran that I have been speaking with about this question about NATO, everybody agrees they have a saying that never alone again. So in a way that explains, I mean, the trauma, especially from the Winter War when we really were alone. So it's so hard and it's so deep in their minds. So of course there are some veterans who would like to be out of any military alliances, but vast majority of them they agree with this decision.
And that was Sakari Martimo of the War Veterans Association. I also spoke with Olli Kleemola, a historian at the University of Turku. He just wrote a book on this war generation, roughly translated into Veterans and Finnish Society. He told me that the way Finland celebrates Independence Day has changed significantly over the years, with the end of the Cold War marking a major turn.
It started with President Mauno Koivisto, a veteran himself, who invited the veterans for the first time in 1989 to remember the battles of the Winter War, since it was the 50th commemoration of Winter War. What I want to highlight, so to say, the veterans being honor guests in the president's event, it is really only after the end of the Cold War. It isn't something which has been going on after the whole post-war time. Even though that we think it's an old tradition, it isn't. Look at me. I born in 1987, and for all my life, this tradition has been there. As long as I can remember, it has been there.
Olli added that the fall of the Berlin Wall had a major impact on how Finland viewed its own history. During the Cold War, Finland's internal politics were closely monitored by the Soviet Union, Finland's enemy in the Winter and Continuation Wars. Many aspects of Finnish political and cultural life were curbed in an effort to appease the Soviets, and what has since become known as Finlandization. If Finnish leaders revered its war veterans the same way it does today during this time period, it could have elicited a negative reaction from the eastern neighbor. While the wars were commemorated at the grassroots level, it wasn't as front and center as it is today. Once the Soviet Union collapsed and veterans started retiring from their civilian careers, there was a distinct shift in how Finland commemorated the wars.
Because the closeness to the Soviet Union and the Finlandization, the state leadership, at the most President Kekkonen, who wasn't a veteran himself, could not openly express his appreciation for the veterans, even though the wars were and the fallen were commemorated. I mean, it wasn't like today. We did have something like a renaissance of veteran activities in the 90s. All the veterans were already retired from work, which did mean they had more time for activities in veterans organizations like this. This also played in the cards of rising veterans' appreciation, because they were active themselves. They still had the energy to work like on books and things like that, and this of course contributed to the rising appreciation, because today we have like veterans are the honor guests everywhere. And for the future, it remains to be seen how the situation will develop once there is no personal contact to the veterans anymore. I mean, it will surely change the commemoration of the wars, that there are no first-hand accountings anymore.
Both Olli and Sakari noted that one of the defining strengths of Finland's wartime generation was the sense of unity across society. Veterans came from every region, social background, yet served side by side. 3 Finnish Jews were even nominated for the Iron Cross by Nazi Germany, Finland's co-belligerent during the Continuation War. All 3 of them refused to accept it. But that unity in Finland was central to how the country endured. As the Finnish wartime generation reaches and surpasses 100 years of age, much of the history they lived through is shifting from personal memory to recorded research. As Olli said, Finland is losing first-hand accounts of the war. For this podcast episode, I tried finding a veteran myself to interview in English. Many from this generation immigrated to the United States and Canada after the war, and there used to be Finnish veteran associations in North America. Unfortunately, I was unable to find anyone, and it seems that most from this group have already passed on. Many of these stories have already been recorded, but there's quite a lot that hasn't entirely been marked down, especially in English. Some of this work is now being carried out far beyond Finland's borders, and one of the people helping to document this history is Ian McCollum. If you spent any time on YouTube looking up Finland's military history, chances are you've encountered Ian. He's a firearms historian and creator of the channel Forgotten Weapons. Although his work tells the stories of firearms from all over the world, he is currently in the final stages of a book titled Forged in Snow, a comprehensive reference guide for military firearms manufactured and modified in Finland since the country's independence in 1917 all the way up to today. Ian has traveled to Finland many times, and for this book, he worked closely with the Military Museum of Finland. I asked him about the technical reasons Finland has become such a compelling subject for firearm historians.
Probably the single biggest thing is Finnish firearms have always, they've had to balance this difficult conundrum of there's only one potential enemy that Finland really has to worry about, and they're really huge compared to Finland, but the Finnish military has never had a whole lot of money to play around with. Here in the United States, the U.S. Army can essentially spend whatever it wants to and buy the latest, greatest, fanciest whiz-bang technology that they want. Finland, especially early on, was very tightly constricted by funds, and that forced a really interesting level of creativity in small arms development in Finland. So essentially, the country started with Mosin Nagants, which for your listeners who aren't super gun nerds, the Mosin Nagant is a bolt action, so it's a manually operated rifle. It was developed in Russia in the 1890s. It was the primary weapon for the Russian Empire in World War I, and it's kind of generally considered to be the worst weapon, the worst generally used weapon of its class and type. But that's what was available in Finland in 1917, 1918, 1919, and so that's kind of the only choice that the defense forces had when they were founded. And the question then became, what can we do with this base gun to make it better, but not cost a lot of money? If the money had been available, the defense forces would have absolutely loved to switch over to some totally different weapons platforms. The Mauser, everyone really liked the Mauser a lot more than the Mosin. They just didn't have the money to go out and buy an entire army's worth of new Mauser rifles. And during the interwar period, Finland actually really kind of benefited financially from the fact that the Mosin was considered the worst gun of its class, and there wasn't really anybody else out there in Europe that was looking to use them. But a lot of people had leftovers from World War I, and Finland was able to buy up Mosins from the international market to use as base guns and parts for building their own specific models during the 1920s and 1930s. It really was the English phrase, I believe, would be turning a sow's ear into a silk purse.
I also wanted to understand why documenting this history still matters, especially to those outside the country, and as Finland's wartime generation diminishes rapidly.
Especially compared to the United States, Finland has a really important firsthand experience of why it can be worth going to war. In the U.S., like in World War II, the United States was never in any danger of enemy troops on our soil. We've got two giant oceans. It's never going to happen. The United States never really suffered that much deprivation in terms of rationing or, anything. We didn't have anyone bombing us. And in Finland, of course, much of that did happen, like in much of Europe, but Finland was an exception compared to the Baltic states. Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and Finland, right before the war starts, are all essentially invited by Stalin to cooperate and provide some military bases, and we'll all just totally be friends and it'll be great. And Finland says no and ends up remaining a sovereign country and growing into the really relatively wealthy, advanced country that it is today. Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia all look at their military situation and go, we probably can't hope to win this fight, so we'll just kowtow to it. And they end up occupied for 5 decades. Finland's military was more substantial than the Baltic states, but not hugely. In the years, the couple of years right before the war, Mannerheim was looking at the state of the Finnish military and essentially knew, like, we can never actually defeat the Soviet Union. We need to have an acceptable peace treaty and come to some terms. And when there were no terms and there was an invasion instead, he put his all into utilizing that military as best he could, but knew that this was a delaying action the entire time. But being willing to take that fight on is what kept Finland a sovereign country. And I think there's a really important firsthand lesson in that.
And that was Ian McCullum from the YouTube channel Forgotten Weapons. While these wars ended over 8 decades ago, the legacy of Finland's veterans still shapes the world we live in, sometimes quietly, sometimes violently. Nowhere did that feel clearer to me than during a trip I took last year to my girlfriend's hometown in western Ukraine. Ternopil is a city of about 200,000, with Soviet-era apartment blocks lining the streets, trolley buses rattling under overhead wires, and, despite the war, people doing their best to live normal lives. But the war is always there. During our visit, air raid sirens woke us in the middle of the night. In the main square, we walked past row after row of memorials to the fallen. And one afternoon, as we were driving back into town, traffic stopped. We stepped out of the car, and in the bright sun, I removed my hat and looked on as a funeral procession for a fallen soldier passed slowly through the street. War's distance can shrink suddenly. About 2 weeks ago, Russia fired a missile into a residential high-rise in Ternopil, killing over 30 people, just a few hundred meters or so from where my girlfriend went to school. Before I took that trip, I had written a story about Kaspar Alhoniemi, the first Finnish volunteer killed in combat in Ukraine. Kaspar told his family that he felt compelled to defend Ukraine because of Finland's own experience, that if someone had come to help the Finns in 1939, history might have been different. That story was on my mind when I found myself in an empty restaurant one afternoon during my visit. 2 men in camouflage walked in, speaking English. I went over and introduced myself. One was a Scot, a veteran of Afghanistan and Iraq, now fighting for Ukraine. The other, in this small city, had a noticeably Finnish name. It turned out he was from Helsinki, and he and I had even completed the same exact training in the Finnish Defense Forces. When I asked him what led him to come here to fight, he recalled the legacy of Finland's wartime veterans. He believed that the example that generation lived by still carries obligations today. Even as the last veterans from Finland's wars pass on, the memory they have instilled and the example they lived by rings true today. As for what advice this generation can give us, here's Sakari Martimo.
They have seen and experienced so much that they, as said earlier, they can put these things in perspective. And in a nutshell, they advise us to be cool. They advise us to respect our neighbor in the east, west, north, south, but then also keep our fists ready, if you understand what I mean. We have to be able to fight also if needed, but try to maintain peaceful conditions as long as possible.
If you would like to reach out to us, you can send us a message or a voice note via WhatsApp to +358 44 421 0909, or you can contact us by email, allpointsnorth@yle.fi. And now, a roundup of the main news headlines this week. Finland is ready to participate in Ukraine's security arrangements, but not offer formal security guarantees, Prime Minister Petteri Orpo said earlier this week.
We have not had any discussion on this issue, and I don't know why Finland was mentioned in the paper. And we have to understand that security guarantees is something very, very serious, and we are not ready to give security guarantees, but we can help in security arrangements. The difference is huge between these two.
Orpo also stated that this week Finland must apologize to the Sami people for a long history of discrimination. His comments followed the release of a report by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which contained 70 recommendations on how Finland can repair its relationship with the indigenous Sami people. With December now in full swing, advent calendars are no longer just for kids. Adults, too, are eagerly popping open tiny doors. You can read more about this phenomenon and its environmental consequences on our website, yle.fi/news. 3 out of 4 people in Finland support a so-called millionaire tax to secure the funding of social and health services. That's according to a survey commissioned by the Left Alliance Party. Even among supporters of the governing National Coalition and Finns parties, over half considered such a tax either necessary or absolutely necessary. And a new law goes into effect at the beginning of next year that will end the possibility for people to pick up another person's newly issued passport or ID card using the power of attorney on paper. The police say that the reason for the change is that it's too easy to forge these papers. And I guess I'm in the minority, since 1 in 4 Finns eat their meals on the sofa, or I guess in my case, the futon. That's according to a recent survey by a Finnish property and development firm. I will concede, though, that this eating on our couch isn't really a choice, since we only have a coffee table in our small Kallio flat. But apparently, it's more common in my demographic anyway, so I guess I'm not entirely alone. Usually, at this point in the podcast, we recommend something in English, but given the theme of the podcast and that this always airs on TV in Finland for Independence Day, our suggestion this week is The Unknown Soldier or Tuntematon sotilas on Yle Areena. And if you're a bit confused about the movie and its significance, we have a podcast from last year's Independence Day to serve as a supplementary listen. And that's it for another episode of All Points North. A big thanks to our audio engineer, Panu Willman, for putting this week's show together. And we wish all of you a happy Independence Day. Bye for now.